Preventing injuries. Well, the easiest way to prevent injuries is to ensure everyone in the room during the activity or experiment is wearing goggles. Remind the students the importance of wearing the goggles around their eyes, not their neck, and not their forehead. They make really nice headbands, but they're very useless when they're up there on the top of your head. If there's a chance of soiling or damaging clothing, you can have them wear a lab apron or an art smock made of cotton. They can use gloves or heat-resistant or cold-resistant mitts or other hand protection if they're handling hot materials, dry ice, nauseous plants, or live animals. I would not recommend having hot materials, nauseous plants, or live animals in the lower level elementary school, children, kindergarten, first grade, just because there's a lot of other variables there that you're not able to really control because they're so young. But doing the hot materials and live animals in your older second, third, and fourth grade, it's a little bit easier. You have a little bit more control over their ability to follow your instructions. Dry ice, the biggest concern there is it can burn you, and so if you handle dry ice in the classroom, I would recommend you handling it or making sure that they have very thick gloves and they have the dexterity to hold the dry ice, because once it drops, they're going to be very tempted to pick it up with their bare hand and not the glove hand. So I would handle dry ice with a very thick glove for them if possible. You should make sure they tie back their long hair and secure any loose clothing and dangling jewelry. We don't tend to have the maybe jewelry issue as much in the younger kids as we might the older kids, but the long hair could be an issue. May not hurt to have some hair ties around to keep in the students' desks for those specific days. We all know rubber bands. If you have long hair, rubber bands are very painful in your hair. The last thing on this one is to remind students to keep the science materials away from their mouths, noses, and eyes at all time. And this is going to include their hands. So once you touch something, you don't want to touch your mouth, nose, or eyes because your hands are now contaminated. It's not just keeping the chemical itself away from it because you can see it, but once you touch something, now your hands are contaminated, and that's going to be something that's really important to make sure that they're aware of. However, if they're wearing goggles, they're not going to be touching their eye unless they're taking them off. Students should not work with hot materials such as very hot water. So if you have, for any reason, you're using boiling water or water that could cause burns, you should be the one handling it, or coming up with an alternative experiment to show kind of what you're illustrating. But the risk for burns is very high at that level with all the hands reaching over and around tables, bumping things. And in addition to that, very hot materials would need glassware, and there's a concern with that as well. Keep the students away from hot plates if you're using them. These are like little ovens that are still in use or still hot unless you're right beside the students and have given them specific instructions. So the thing about hot glassware and hot plates, just like the oven, the oven has a light telling you that the stovetop is hot, so you know not to touch it. But hot plates and hot glassware don't have lights like that. And so hot glassware and cold glassware look identical. The only difference between the two is it's hot when you touch it, and you often don't know it's hot until you have already touched it. This has happened to me several times in teaching a lab where a student has asked me to look at something and I've gone over and grabbed it and they did not tell me they had just heated it up. And when I grabbed the beaker, my first thought is to throw it because it's hot. And I've broken beakers before for that very reason. So just make sure that they're aware hot and cold glassware look the same, but one can hurt you more than the other. You should only use safety matches, but even with these, handle and use matches yourself. If you decide that students themselves must use matches as part of the science activity, provide very specific instructions on how to safely use them and only permit students to use them under your direct supervision. My thought is that no student should be handling a match or anything with fire. There's just too many things that could go wrong in a classroom that would then set off an emergency. I think middle school, maybe. High school, probably. That's an appropriate age. Definitely in college, my science students will use Bunsen burners and matches and things like that, but not at the elementary school level. It's just really probably not absolutely necessary. So there's some recommendation for sharing goggles in The college level class, we make students buy goggles, so they have their own. But when you're in elementary school, you're probably going to have what's called shared goggles. And so after use, shared goggles, including the strap, it's a fabric strap, should be thoroughly washed in warm water containing high quality dishwashing detergent. Then they need to be thoroughly rinsed with fresh water and allowed to dry before the next use. This procedure should be sufficient to prevent environmentally transmitted disease, and according to the CDC, the washing protocol should provide adequate protection against common head lice. And then there's more information about preventing the spread of head lice. So nowadays they have these really neat things you can buy, which they go on the wall, and you put your goggles in them and they sanitize them overnight. If you don't have one of those, then you have to hand wash these goggles, but you're probably not doing experiments every day. So this is not something you're going to be doing each and every day before you leave, but it is something you need to do as soon as the goggles have been used. And that way they're ready to go for the next time. Don't wait and do it the day before the experiment. Go ahead and clean them, store them as clean, and have them ready to go out the next time. So earlier we said that really one of the goals of lab safety is to teach the students. So introducing lab safety practices and helping your students understand why and how these practices are used is so important. You can either set up the rules or have students help you develop science safety rules. So that would be a fun activity. What would be a lab safety rule? And have your class brainstorm some ideas. Either way, make sure that the students understand all rules and why we have them. That's important to get them to understand rules is why. You may choose to have students create posters for display in the room throughout the year to emphasize safety and remind students of the specific safety rules. Posters are great in the classroom. Students really like them. They illustrate the rule, make it very clear why and what it is, and then review the following safety rules with your students before beginning an activity. So now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of student safety rule examples. One would be always get your teacher's approval before conducting a science activity, and be sure to have your teachers supervise when you conduct a science activity. Never experiment on your own. So the last part would make a really great poster tagline. Always wear safety goggles when your teacher tells you to do so. Do not remove your goggles until the teacher says it's okay. If you're instructed to do so, wear an apron or smock to protect your clothing. Read and follow all warning labels on substances being used. So obviously this isn't going to be something you can probably ask kindergarten, first grade, maybe even second grade to do. Second grade, maybe they can read it, but maybe not understand it. But your third and fourth graders, they might start to be able to piece together some of these pieces. For your lower level elementary kids, you're going to have to explain the safety concerns to them beforehand. Be sure your teacher is aware of any allergies you may have. Again, depending on the age group, elementary school kids may or may not know what they're allergic to. Upper level elementary kids probably do. The other thing is some kids don't know they're allergic to things because they haven't been exposed to them. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you may be the first person that figures out this student is allergic to bleach. Carefully follow all instructions when conducting a science activity. Be sure to use substances exactly as described. Just kind of follow the rules. Keep all materials used in the science activity away from your mouth, nose, and eyes. Do not place your hands on your face when conducting or cleaning after an activity. They can only touch their face after they've washed their hands. Never taste anything during a science activity. If an investigation involves tasting, it will be done in the cafeteria. So that's a great thing to do. If you are going to encourage them to taste something, don't do it in the classroom where sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not okay. In the cafeteria, it's very clear that's a place of eating. So it makes sense that they would be able to taste something if they're in the cafeteria. Tie back long hair, secure your loose clothing and dangling jewelry. Know the location of all the safety equipment, such as the goggle cabinet, this would be where you sanitize them, fire blanket, first aid kit, and so forth in or near your classroom. Safety equipment must remain in good working condition. Do not play with it. Tell your teacher immediately if you have an injury, spill, or other accident occur. Clean up your work area after conducting a science activity. Wash your hands with soap and water after completing the science activity. So not all of these rules will apply to your classroom, but you could probably pick 5 or 6 of these, and these would make perfect rules for your classroom. So emergency and safety equipment. Inevitably, emergencies might happen. You can always minimize the risks. You can always make alternatives, but you can't always control the reality that emergencies do occur. So one of the things you should do is talk with your other science teachers, your principal, develop and establish procedures for first aid, electric shock, poisoning, burns, allergic reactions, fire, evacuation, spills, or animal bites. Chances are your school district will already have these. Find the contact information for things like poison control, the local fire department, hazmat with the fire department. Keep it handy so you can contact the appropriate authorities and response agencies in the event of an emergency. Again, chances are your school district will already have this. Know the location of the nearest fire extinguisher. Make sure you're trained in how to use it. Check your school's policy about what to do in the event of a fire. Know the location of the nearest fire alarm. Have a map by the door of the classroom illustrating its location. Learn the signs of plant poisoning and be prepared to react. So what if we do have glassware and it breaks? One, you should use a specific broom and dustpan to clean up the broken glassware. Do not touch it. Do not allow students to touch it. Dispose of the glass in a separate container and label it to inform others that it contains broken glass. So we have a broken glass trash, and it's a specific trash can where only broken glass goes in, because if someone else was to reach in our normal household trash to grab something they think they dropped in, they could grab glass. And so when you dispose of glass, you need to make sure you're doing it in a way that minimizes other people from being cut or hurt because there's glass in that trash. Clean up any spill immediately, especially if it's a liquid spill. This will prevent further contamination of the work area and possibly any slipping, falling, or tracking of the chemical to another location. When you're using household or other chemicals, follow the cleanup instructions provided on the label or find its MSDS. Throw away all paper towels or other cleanup materials in a separate container for chemical waste. Do not put chemical waste in the normal trash containers, okay? For the same reason that you don't want to put glass in there, you don't want somebody else to reach into the trash and then get exposed to a chemical and not know what they've possibly come in contact with. So disposal. At the end, you should dispose of all chemicals properly. Check with the MSDS. It will provide information to you. If you don't know, ask your science supervisor or a local expert. Batteries with the evidence of corrosion should be discarded according to the school policy or local disposal regulations. So, to conclude, even very young students must follow safety rules and have a sense of whether or not a behavior is safe. Make it clear that students who do not follow these rules will lose the privilege of taking part in fun, hands-on activities. Kids don't like to miss out. For the safety of all, misbehaving students must be removed from the area where hands-on activities are being conducted. As a student continues to learn about the importance of science safety throughout their elementary school years, they will transfer those skills beyond the classroom to other classrooms, to the science lab in middle school and high school, and to life in general. So you're laying a foundation for them that's so important, and the more time you spend preparing and planning these experiments, the better the time will be for the student in general, and then also for you, because it won't be as frustrating. So there's a website here. There it is. For more information, this is the National Science Teacher Association, and it has other safety rules and other resources that might be of interest to you, and so its link is here. And so make sure, if you feel like you're missing anything, that you go back to this. Make sure you find the homework assignment regarding lab safety and submit that by the due date, and let me know if you have